Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So for today we are going to learn model number 7 DHCP version 4. So I'm going to use this topology which consists of two routers connected to four switches, and we have four PCs. So this PC will receive the IP address automatically from routers number 1. So we will configure the R1 as a DHCP server. Okay, so let's start with the concept of DHCP version 4 first. Okay, so the concept of the DHCP version 4 is DHCP will assign the IP address and other network configurations information. For example, if you configure the DNS address, the DHCP server will also give the information to the client. Okay, so DHCP servers normally will leave the IP address to the client based on the pool address, and also for a limited period time chosen by the server until the client no longer needs the address. So we look into the DHCP operations. So this is the step how one client will receive the IP address automatically from DHCP server. So this is the process to obtain a list IP address from the server. So at first, the client will start the communication, which is the DHCP version 4 client will start to send the DHCP discover. For example, I would like to request an address. DHCP version 4 will send DHCP discover to find out the available DHCP version 4 on the network. If we have DHCP server, then the DHCP server will reply by sending DHCP offer packets to the clients. I am DHCP version 4. Here is the address offer. So the client will start to accept the IPv4 address if the IP address is not duplicated or clashed, okay, with others. So a DHCP client will accept the IPv4 address, and then once received to the server, DHCP server will send back the acknowledgements to acceptance to mention to the client, yes, your acceptance is acknowledged. So this is the process of how DHCP version 4 and version 4 clients and DHCP servers communicate between them. Okay, so this example will shows to you, let's say once the client have the IP address, and then we know that the IP address will be expired based on a certain period of time. Then if the clients want to renew the IP address, so the client will need to renew the list IP address by sending the DHCP request to the servers, and then the servers will send acknowledgements to acknowledge the request. Okay, so there are no more DHCP discover and DHCP offer because they already known each other. Okay, so the configurations, for example, this is a topology, a simple topology, how we can configure DHCP server. So of course we can configure on router, we also can configure DHCP server on the switch, but in this example I will show to you the configurations. We are going to configure R1 as a DHCP server. So R1 will release the IP address to PC number 1 and PC number 2. Okay, so there are few steps that need to be followed. The first is about IP DHCP excluded address. So first you need to exclude the address. Okay, exclude the address. For example, you need to exclude the address which has been configured statically to your network. For example, the interface of the router. Okay, for example, let's look into the diagram. So kita tahu this R1 has two interface, which is G0/0/0 and G0/0/1, and these two interface will be configured statically IP address. Okay, for example, is this diagram. The IP address configured statically to this interface is 192.168.10.1. So these are the static IP address configured. So when you configure DHCP server, you need to make sure that this IP address 10.1 will be excluded. If not, the routers will also give this IP address 10.1 to the client, to the first client, for example. Then it will make your network clash of IP address. So you need to make sure and identify first which address needs to be excluded. Okay, of course, normally the IP address that assigned statically to your network equipment, for example, the network interface and so on. So we need to identify first. After you already identified the DHCP excluded address, then you need to create the DHCP pool name by issue the command ipdhcp pool and give the pool names. Okay, and then you start to set the network address. Okay, so this is the full example of the topology of the configurations of the DHCP server. So first we exclude IP DHCP excluded address 192.168.10.1. So you exclude this IP address range till 192.168.10.9. So you excluded the address starting from 10.1 till 10.9. So the server, the DHCP server will start release the IP address starting from 10.10 to the client. And also here we also include .254. So you can use how many lines you want as long as still within the range. Okay, contoh yang pertama ni, yang first line kita buat range, second kita buat a certain number. Okay, so then you akan start buat IP DHCP pool name. Okay, for example we create LAN pool 1 sebab mungkin kita ada banyak interface, banyak pool. For example we have 10.0 pool and 11.0 pool. So the dual network. PC number 1 we receive the IP address from 10.0 network, and PC number 2 we receive IP address from 11.0 network. Means that you have two network, two pools. So you need to create the pools. Okay, for example here we just create one pool, so we need to create another one pool for 11.0. Okay, so then you advertise the network address including the subnet mask, and then you set the default gateway, default router, so which is the gateway of your network subnet, of your subnet. For example 10.1, so you will use this default gateway. Issue the command default router, put your gateway addresses. So DNS server is optional and domain name is optional, so these two command is just optional. Alright, so let's try to do the configurations. Okay, let's start with the configuration. So in this topology I still not do any configurations. Okay, so let's start. Let's start first with the configuration of IP address of the server. No. Alright, so we set enable config t, set the host name first, R1, and then we set the IP address for both interface. Okay, not the third interface. So we start first config t interface G0/0, which is the first interface, and then you set the IP address 192.168.10.1, subnet mask 255.255.255.0, and no shut. Okay, I'm missing the command. Sorry, I'm missing the command IP address. I'm missing the command IP address. Okay, so no shut. Is it you set to the second interface G0/1, IP address 192.168.10.1, 20.1 subnet mask 255.255.255.0 no shut. Okay, so the interface will be up, and then we configure interface serial 0/0/0 IP address 10.0.0.1 subnet mask 255.255.255.252 no shut. Okay, so the configurations will be done for router numbers 1. Okay, let's say we configure, I think we just configure on this half first. So okay, so now we can configure the IP address, the DHCP server. I'm sorry, we can configure the DHCP server now. Okay, before we proceed to the DHCP server configurations, just to make sure that everything is fine, so we can set manually IP address. For example, here we can set IP 192.10.10, for example, and the subnet mask. So default gateway is 192.168.10.1. So if we do the configurations, then we can ping from PC1 to the default gateway. Okay, so 192.168.10.1, so it's pingable. So okay, for example, here we configure, we ping IP address 192.168.20.10, 192.168.20.1. so 20.10 suppose can ping its default gateway 192.168.20.1, so it's pingable. However, if you want to ping from this PC number 2 to PC number 1, 10.10, let's be check first. 10.10 is it right? So okay, okay, so 10.10, okay, it's pingable. So from PC1, this one is PC number 1, ping 192.168.20.10, so it's pingable. So why is pingable? This is because show IP route is because of we have routings between these two networks. Okay, because we have routing between these two networks, as you can see that the router 1 has the path determinations to network 10.0, okay, via G0.0, so dia boleh lalu lah, and also 20.0 via G0/1. so untuk pergi ke network 20.0 dia akan pass the packets to the G0/1, so dia boleh pergi. Okay, so now that's not the issue. The issue is you want to use the DHCP. As we can see that if you request the DHCP, there is no IP address will be assigned to the client. Okay, we start with 169 means that there's no DHCP servers configured. Alright, so we unable to receive the IP address. So now we need to configure the DHCP servers. Config T, so we can use the command IP DHCP excluded. Alright, excluded address 192.168.10. Let's say we configure for the first network 10.0 network. So 10 to exclude first 192.10.1 till 10.9. So we reserve the first 10 IP address 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, we reserve the 9 IP address. This is 8.10.9 exclude the IP address, and then you create DHCP pool. You give name LAN pool 1. Okay, so we set the network address, which is 192.168.10.0. Okay, 10.0, including the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Default router, you set the gateway of this network interface, which is 192.168.10.1. so DNS server and domain name server is not compulsory, it's just optional. Okay, so we can try to see either the DHCP server is working or not. So let's try. So we set the static and then we try to request the IP address from server. Yes, we received the first IP address 10.10. Okay, if we want to try more, we can add one more PC here and then do the connections between this switch to this PC, and then you can set IP address as a DHCP, then it will receive the IP address, the next available IP address. Okay, this is failed because of the links false ethernet 0/2 still in the green mode. Okay, once it up to the green, then it will receive the IP address. Okay, while waiting for this interface up, okay, it's already up, so we try static DHCP. We receive either we receive the IP address. Yes, we receive the IP address 10.11. Okay, so we can proceed to the second configurations, which is config T. You set for second network IP DHCP excluded 192.168.20.1, 192.168.20.9. so you excluded the IP address 1 to 9 from this 20 network, and then you create IP DHCP pool name. You give a name LAN pool 2, for example, and then you set the IP address, the network address, to network 192.168.20.0, including the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. you set the default router, which is for this network 192.168.20.1. so others is optional, and then you save these configurations, and let's see the configurations. Either this PC number 2 will receive the IP address or not. As you can see, already successful, and then just try to refresh. So we received 20.10 IP address. Okay, so we can configure also to this router number 2. So router number 2 can be also DHCP servers to handle the 30.0 network and 40.0 network, so there is no problem. Okay,